Mr. Minnick here with another video on Total War, a willingness to sacrifice lives and resources for victory. Let's look at our big question and answer. How did the Union's Total War strategy impact the South? Well, Total War deprived the Confederacy of supplies needed to fight and demoralize the citizens. This is a very big difference between the initial strategy of the Union, where it was all about let's just wound them economically. Now, with the demoralization of citizens, it's going to make the citizens not want to support the Confederate war. We have here Ulysses S. Grant back at it again. He's going to be talking to his fellow General Philip Sheridan. Grant is going to institute this new policy of total war. The war has not ended yet. Even after Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the Confederacy has not shown any signs of giving up. So he's going to take it a step further. It's like, okay, if they're not going to give up, let's do this. Leave nothing to invite the enemy to return. Destroy whatever cannot be consumed. Let the valley be left so that crows flying over it will have to carry their rations along with them. Very intense. But what does he mean by this total war idea? Now we have here General Philip Sheridan, a man with a wonderful mustache and excellent hat, is going to be commanded by Ulysses S. Grant to take his troops in the Shenandoah Valley, a very fertile piece of land used for food that is going to be given to the states of Virginia and North Carolina. Confederate forces located here get their food from this territory. And Grant says, Sheridan, what I want you to do is take your army in there and completely destroy that so they can't use it. Because I'm having to deal with over here for my march to Richmond, Robert E. Lee. Sheridan is going to start the implementation of total war because of Grant's command. I have here for you a map of Sherman's March to the Sea. One thing to be aware of, everyone, is that the Civil War is fought all throughout the American South. We don't just have the fighting taking place around Richmond, we also have it in deeper parts of the South like Georgia. And on this map of Sherman's March to the Sea, you're going to notice all these lines that are going to be showing troop movement from Atlanta to Savannah. What I'm referring to is a man by the name of William Tecumseh Sherman. He's going to seize control of the city of Atlanta, Georgia, after a very bloody battle. He's not going to implement the strategies of total war just yet. Atlanta, of course, will suffer from great amount of damage from the fighting that took place, but nonetheless, he's going to acknowledge the following after the battle. He's going to send a telegram to his good friend Ulysses S. Grant, they were actually friends, and say the following. Until we can repopulate Georgia, it is useless to occupy it. But utter destruction of its roads, houses, and people will cripple their military resources. He says we don't need to hold Georgia as a territory to defend. Let's just destroy it to cripple the military of the Confederacy. And he says if we try to defend it and hold this land, we will lose 1,000 men monthly and will gain no result. He said there's no reason for us just to hold the state because we're going to have to deal with guerrillas. I told you earlier, guys, that the Confederacy loved to follow in the footsteps of the American colonists during the Revolution. They're going to try and make use of guerrilla warfare here to wear down the Union. It doesn't work because Sherman's like, we're not going to defend roads and nonsense like that. We don't even need to do that. Instead, I'm going to do this. He says, I'm going to make the march to Savannah, city all on the eastern part of the state of Georgia, and make Georgia howl. Make them submit. And we have over 8,000 cattle, 3 million pounds of bread, but no corn. But we can forage the interior of the state. What does forage mean, everyone? Well, let me tell you what I'm referring to here. Foraging is a fancy way to say, let's pillage all the interior of the state for what it's worth. Let's take all those wonderful supplies that we could use for our own army, and anything we can't use, we're going to destroy. And what I mean by that is they're going to be forager units created in the Union Army that are going to, after each battle that'll take place from Atlanta to Savannah, which is of course located there, are going to be pillaging parts of Georgia. And what they leave in their wake is a path of destruction. Sherman will split his forces as they go all the way from Atlanta to Georgia, where these foragers will be either stealing tons of supplies from farms, destroying railroads so the Confederacy can't use them, and burning the land so it cannot be used again after the Union has marched through it. Because as Sherman said, we don't need to hold this land. Let's bleed it dry of everything it's worth, because that'll harm the Confederacy. And he does this. And what do we get as a result of this? Well, I think we get a good superlative. He's certainly the most likely to light everything on fire because his foragers are doing just that under his command. West Point, class of 1840. And then we got Robert E. Lee on the opposite end of our superlative spectrum. He's the most likely to succeed in the West Point class of 1829. To showcase some primary source photos, we got Sherman's men destroying railroads so they can't be used. And of course, we can see that in this following picture here. It's just a little blurrier. We have a engraving called Foragers on a Georgia Plantation. It's going to be a depiction about the major critics of Sherman's actions, the violence that's going to be taking place here. We can, of course, see this Union soldier jumping on a pig there, shooting cattle and so forth. You can see it over here in the back. The barns are set on fire. You can actually see some slaves over here. And a lot of this violence, this intensity is occurring, and that Sherman is aware of it. He says, I imagine that this would be happening. But there are other critics that say that during this time that a lot of these foragers, these bummers as they were called, took part in murdering of citizens, the rape of women, and really heinous acts that were under Sherman's command. Now, on the slave perspective, a lot of slaves actually viewed Sherman as almost like the second coming, that he was, punishing the Southerners for their act against God, and that he was liberating them from that bondage. And Sherman is, of course, going to be aware of the following here. And this is from a secondary source called Scorched Earth, though. And it says, whether it was a plantation manor, a more modest white dwelling, or a slave hut, any residents encountered by these bummers, or foragers, stood a chance of being utterly ransacked. So there was a possibility that they could have all their stuff taken from them. Barns, gardens, and farms were overrun, although many of them were damaged and a minority put to the torch and totally destroyed. Others were left essentially untouched, an unpredictability that became a great source of fear. So not every place that the Union came through was completely destroyed. However, when the foragers decided to take part in this action, it would be a complete ransack, a complete pillage. You think of like pirates, going through a town and taking everything that's there for themselves. If it occurred, that's what would happen. However, it didn't always. And because of that, a lot of Confederate citizens are fearful, is my plantation, is my home next? They didn't know. And Sherman, of course, is going to say, well, no doubt many acts of pillage, robbery, and violence were committed by these parties of foragers, which were under his command. He said, I've never heard of any cases of murder or rape. He says, yeah, some intensity did occur, but not to the barbaric criticism that I'm receiving here, that I'm condoning these actions, which a lot of Southerners claim that Sherman's men were taking part in these actions, that he was, dishonorable, horrific man that was, condoning murder and rape. So what's going to happen then is, of course, Sherman is going to capture Savannah during his march. He's actually going to have not much resistance from Confederate forces there as he's marching along. And what he's going to say here, though, it's kind of humorous, really, is he's being criticized, right, for being this brutal man who's condoning horrible, heinous acts against humanity. But in escaping Savannah, Georgia, several Confederate generals left their wives and children to Sherman's personal protection, and he took this responsibility seriously. So Confederate generals who were living in Savannah, who fled and left their children there, left them in the care of Sherman, who they're claiming he's this man condoning rape and murder. And he took it very seriously, despite laughing that Confederates were willing to leave their families in the care of someone they considered a brute. There's a little irony, a little humor in that. That they're like, oh, Sherman, please take care of my family, despite the fact I think you're a horrible person. But he took it seriously, and he did, out of respect for his fellow, or his opposing commanders. We go to South Carolina. There's a very famous photo here talking about the burning of Columbia, South Carolina. You can see the utter destruction, just completely ruined. Everything's been torched, blown out from bombardments and gunfire. And Sherman's going to say, though, that though I've never ordered it and never wished it, I've never shed any tears over the event, because I believe that it hastened what we fought for, the end of the war. So he says, look, I never actually ordered this to happen, and I didn't wish for it to happen in this burning of Columbia as we moved up from Savannah. And I never actually shed any tears over the event either, so I'm not like really remorseful, but I believed it's important. Because at the end of the day, we're fighting to bring this thing to a close. That's why I'm following what General Ulysses S. Grant is telling me to do of total war. We have to bring this war to a close. It is going on far too long. It needs to stop. Burning down cities like Columbia, South Carolina achieves it. Great. But just be aware, I didn't order it, just for the record. That's what he's saying here. Got two perspectives here, right? About Sherman as a man. You know, is he a cruel warlord? Are his foragers nothing more than just these like pillagers and murderers? Or was he a determined realist? He said, look, all this destruction, this sort of making Georgia howl, burning down South Carolina and Columbia, is that just being realistic because the war's now gone on at this point for 3 years? It's something for you to think about as you're continuing this study of the Civil War. So our big question and answer: how did the Union's total war strategy impact the South? Well, total war deprived the Confederacy of supplies needed to fight and demoralized the citizens. As we saw with our foragers, the fear that their homes would be utterly destroyed or ransacked, although it didn't always happen, existed amongst them. Keep that in mind, guys, as we move forward and come closer and closer to the end of the conflict. Have an excellent day, and I'll see you in the next one.